bullying, hazing, suicide, abuse. These are all areas that need a lot more conversation around them, and today's episode will do just that. Welcome back to Writing with Authors. My name is Vincent A. Lancey. You can learn more about me at Vincent A. Lancey across social media, YouTube, or my website, vincentalancey.com. My latest book is Mental Health Week, the go-to book for elementary school students to learn the basics of mental health in a fun way. Today's guest has a book similar in the fact of the value it provides for kids. He is the author of the Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook. It covers a lot of the topics plaguing kids today: suicide, bullying, self-worth, physical and verbal abuse, being the child of an addict, and so much more. He's an award-winning child advocate who will tell you because of increased anxiety, depression, and bullying, he predicts the highest suicide rate on record this year, especially for teen girls. Many youths are faced with the anxiety from going from virtual to in-person, back and forth. They need help with a lot, and Steve Simpson is here to help them. Steve, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Love it.
Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience a bit on the personal side before we dive into book talk?
Sure. Again, I'm Steve Simpson, and as our host said, Vincent, I'm a survivor. My father was a very violent alcoholic, abuser, both physically and verbal. And I stress that because people brush the verbal aside. And I got to tell you that the verbal, for me, did more long-term damage than the physical. Those scars took much longer to heal. It's the verbal abuse that, when I was younger, destroyed my self-esteem. And it's the verbal abuse that caused hopelessness. And as a result of hopelessness, by the time I was 11 years old, I was suicidal. When I say that, I was not for attention. I really wanted out. I used to always say, I don't live. I don't die. I just don't want to live. It's just the same exact thing. It's not the same thing, because me living was always anxiety, always pain. And I never thought it was going to get better. So that was my living. And like most alcoholic homes, it forced everybody else to be out of sync and dysfunctional as well. And that was my introduction to the world.
Well, I think you're living proof that you can turn it around with any situation through some tools. And I'm sure you're going to share a lot of those tools today because you put them in your book. Again, this book is called the Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook. Please tell us what led to you publishing this book.
Well, I knew for myself, and like you said, once I did get help and I did turn things around, but I knew for myself, if someone had came up to me and handed me that book, I don't need this. It's the worst of my abuse, because it's always denial and I don't want to be put in the spot.
Of course,
so, Young Adult Survival Handbook. First, it's my own personal survival experiences in it. Short, each one short. There's topics on suicide, being a child of an alcoholic, how it affects us, self-esteem, bullying, child abuse, why I won't report it, even surviving the holidays in a dysfunctional home. It's all in there. However, the Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook is an insert in my 4 fiction novels, young adult fiction novels. I have 4 novels, like yourself, I'm a writer, and they're action-packed. They read like a movie a young person would want to see. In fact, everyone always says, these will make great movies. So a lot of people just buy them for the fiction part. But here's the catch. Because the handbook is an insert in those, if a teen wants it, it's not embarrassing them. Why are you getting that? You can just, I love science fiction. I love action flight. I like these type of books. Or in reverse, if you're handing it to a young person and they say, why are you giving me this? Because I know you love these stories. They're going to look at the cover. They're going to see it's obviously a young adult, exciting fiction novel. You just say a prayer that while they have it, they're going to say, what's this other book? And that's how it's a non-aggressive and non-confrontational way to get life-saving information to a young person.
I think you have to change the narrative in some situations, because to get that message through, you have to change the way it's being given. You said in school, if you were given this book, you would have brushed it aside, no problem. So you have to change the way you get that book into the hands of students. Did you always want to be a published author, or is this something that came about just with that story?
No, actually, I've written the fiction parts. I've written since I was a boy, literally.
Yeah.
Since I was a boy. In fact, I remember when I was cutting school, and I cut school early grades. I'm talking like 3rd grade. Where would I go to the library, and I was reading books, and I always said, librarian, can I have a pen and paper? I'd be writing poems, books. That was the one thing I gave myself credit for, was writing. And thank God I didn't listen to all the negativism from my father and even people you might have experienced over the years who don't want to see you get hurt and tell you to give up on your dreams and writing. And thank God, like yourself, I have 4 books published right now. And so that's always been a passion. The fiction of how to deal with these things came later in life, obviously, in my adulthood. Hey, how can I help other young people survive like I did?
Well, before I ask you for some advice for our fellow group of writers here, let's just talk about briefly those 4 books. I know we spoke a lot today about the Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook. What else do you have?
Well, in the 4 books, and not take too much time with each one of them, and there's something for everybody, okay? The books are called, you have Child's Island, you have Runaway, you have The World is Wrong, and you have Who Am I? Every one of them are action-packed stories. Some are science fiction, some are action drama, some are fantasy. So something for everybody. And what I do is even the ones that are science fiction, even someone's not that into science fiction, there's something there for them as well. Okay. But the cool thing about it is even though they're fantastic stories and they're certainly fiction, the characters are very realistic. My characters are probably abused children, they're runaways, they're children of alcoholics. And so I always have that realism in it. So people relate to the characters. They love the characters. You know, as a writer, if you really relate to the character, you enjoy the story so much more. You care what happens to them while you're reading it, you know?
I actually just released my first fictional book, Mental Health Week, and it took a while because it was different for me to create this story, but now I have aspirations to create some sort of series similar to what you got going on there where you could keep growing and expanding on the characters. That's something I'm looking forward to doing. But in order to do that, I have to seek out advice from people. What is some advice you can offer to our community of writers?
Yeah, well, a few things. First off, and you know this too, always write and enjoy the writing. Sometimes I've written articles and things like that. And sometimes if you let it become work, you lose all the fun. And you don't, for me, I don't write as well. Okay. So always still enjoy. Like I remember when I put these books in print, like most people, I have another job, so I'm not a starving writer. I'm a mortgage banker. But I'd be writing 2 o'clock in the morning. But I didn't care because I loved it. So always, number one, write because you love it, not because you want to be a millionaire and all these other things and so on. That's number one. And number two, a lot of people say, well, when I'm writing books, where do I start? I'm having a hard time. So I said this, if you have a part in the book or a scene in the book, for lack of better terms, that you like, it may not be the beginning, just write it. Even if it's the middle of the book, start there, put it aside. I have a great ending, write the ending. You don't have to start from the beginning. Otherwise, again, it becomes like a school assignment and you're not enjoying it anymore. Then you can dial back to, how am I going to begin this? So I always say to writers, don't get hung up on where you're stuck. If you have a fantastic part of a book in your head, go with it. Just start right there. And it's okay to move it around, go back.
Just pick up the pen and start. It's like anything in life. It seems scary. It seems like there's a whole lot of work, but if you break it down, do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever per day, before you know it, you have a lot on that piece of paper or now a lot on the computer screen where you can be proud of your project, make some value to the world. What now can you share about how we can find your book, how we can find you, all of that, all things Steve?
Well, of course, there's always Amazon, but probably the easiest way is our website, which is powerpublishingcorp.com. That's Power Publishing, C-O-R-P, corp.com. You can get all the books on there. There's a nice deal for there. You get all 4 for less money. It costs us to go lunch. But not just the books. There's interviews that I've done, TV interviews and so on, articles that I've written, articles about me, which you can find useful. And I like what you said. You can forward it to your friends or people might need it. And I always say forward it to everybody because sometimes you don't really know who might be thinking of suicide, who might be living abuse. They just put a good show on like I did. I was always cracking jokes. Okay. So there's a lot in there to help somebody out.
Well, thank you for sharing that, everyone. If this sounds like something that you could benefit from, check out his books. You heard his website. If you know of a friend who could really use Steve's services, Steve's offerings, please be sure to connect them. His books have a lot of value. With that, I would like to thank you for stopping by, Writing with Authors, for another show. This show is growing very much quicker than I anticipated. I've got great guests like Steve reaching out, wanting to be a part of this community. Thank you for tuning in. And Steve, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.